Today we're talking about the Kirchhoff EQ by Three-Body Technology. And let me tell you something, this is a video that you definitely want to stick around for because this is an EQ that you definitely need to know about. And you guys may never heard of Three-Body Technology before because, well, I never did until they reached out to me to review this product. And I have to say that I am extremely impressed with this EQ. And I'm just kind of telling this right off the bat here before I even get to my final thoughts, because I want you guys to watch this video and I want you guys to know about this EQ. So definitely stick around to watch it, and we're going to get to it all after this introduction. Welcome everybody, I'm Dan Spencer and I am the Audio Sorcerer. So this is the channel where I teach you how to perfect your audio recording, mixing, and mastering skills. So before we get to the video, make sure you guys smash that like button. Please subscribe and hit that notification bell to know when I have new videos coming out. So without further ado, today we're talking about the Three-Body Technology Kirchhoff EQ. So what is the Kirchhoff EQ and what does it do? Well, the question should be, what doesn't it do? Because it does pretty much everything. It has fully customizable bands, which you can make look pretty much any way you want. It has analog EQ emulation, and it emulates many famous EQs out there, including famous consoles. It has different types of EQs, and we mentioned analog, but it also has linear phase. It has a spectral frequency graph on it that you can see what's visually going on in your instruments or track, so you can make the right decisions. It has dynamic EQ built in, which is great because sometimes dynamic EQ is better to use than a compressor in certain situations. It has many great presets in it and lots of other great features. So this EQ is basically the Swiss Army knife of all EQs. It has anything you can possibly want in it. So in this tutorial / review, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through this user interface, but I'm going to try not to get too technical because there's a lot in it and I don't want to make this video like, an hour long. So I'm going to take you through it pretty quickly. And then we're going to get to a little experiment. So I have a track of overdrive guitars, and I have the Waves SSL EV2 channel strip. And then I have the SSL channel strip 2 from SSL, which is a G series. Well, I have it set up to be a G series because I don't have the E button engaged. And then I basically set this Kirchhoff EQ with the same exact settings as those two channel strips there. And we're going to do a comparison, and we're going to see if the EQs sound exactly the same or if they sound different. So we're going to learn, hey, is this EQ accurate to those channel strips, or is it accurate to one and maybe not another? Maybe it's accurate to the SSL channel strip 2 and maybe not to the Waves EV2. So maybe that tells us something about the EV2. Maybe the EV2 is actually not an accurate SSL. So we can learn things like that. So I'm kind of excited for this experiment, okay? So I do want to mention, if you guys end up liking this plugin, it is a little pricey, but remember, it has everything you can ever want in EQ. It is $149, and I do have a link in the description below where you can purchase it. And now that that's out of the way, let's take a look at the Three-Body Technology Kirchhoff EQ user interface. All right, so here we are in Pro Tools, and I have the Kirchhoff EQ open here. And it looks kind of similar to the Slate Infinity EQ when you first open it here. You start with a blank slate. So I'm not going to go over every parameter in here. So I'm just going to kind of pick out the important ones here and of course show you how to use this EQ. So starting on the top left over here, we see minimum. This is your phase mode selection. So if you select here, these are the different types of phase options you have in here to choose from. I believe minimum is the one that is the zero latency option. So that one is one that's your default, but you can go between analog, mix, and linear. So it's up to you how you want to use these. So over here, you have options to bypass the EQ. You can flip the phase, very basic stuff. This here is your auto makeup gain. So if you want to engage that, light it up in red, that actually engages it here. The FFT here, this has to do, I believe, with their actual spectral graph behind, which you'll see when we're actually playing audio. So you can make some adjustments to it in here. So this 117 bit here, so this thing actually works 64-bit behind the scenes, but you can actually, it's not completely doubling it here, but this will allow you to make it work higher than 64-bit by engaging this button here, but that will be, I believe, a little bit more heavier, if not a lot more heavier on your computer CPU. But you can do that. And you also have the option to do oversampling here, which this only does up to 2x, which is fine because any oversampling is great. Got your setting options in here, and there are actually quite a bit of settings in here if you want to play with them. But for most of us that actually mix, we don't even bother with half the settings in most of these plugins. This is a full screen option here, which is great because sometimes working in EQs like this, making it full screen is fantastic, especially if you have a touchscreen interface like I have. I use the Slate Ravens. Over here on the right here, this is your volume level meter here. This is your output gain down here. Let me go over to the left-hand side over here. So this is where you would see your band's information if you had them created. For example, if I create a band here, you'll see it down here, and we would see all the bands across the bottom here. So let me actually delete that. Okay, close that. This allows you to monitor left, right, mid-side, however you want to actually monitor certain things within EQ, so that's pretty cool. Across the bottom here, these are all the different presets in here. I've tested a few of them out. They're actually very good. The look ahead, I'm not 100% sure on this here, but I believe it is related to the dynamic EQ built into it, but don't quote me on that. So I believe it actually kind of helps look ahead to things related to, the attack and release for certain things, coming up, because that's how dynamic EQ works. It's like a compressor to some extent. So by engaging this here, you can actually turn the power on there, and then you can do how many milliseconds, basically. Next to that, with the width, you can actually shrink the stereo width of this. I actually have this on a stereo track now, so if I didn't want to be 100% wide, I can actually shrink it down right here, okay? So that is pretty much everything surrounding the EQ, but if we want to get into making actual bands, all we have to do is simply just double click, and then we get access to this here. So this is where the magic happens. If you click on where it says bell here, this is where we have all the good stuff in here. So pretty much bell down to sword is all the basic EQ stuff built in, okay? When you get down to type E and down, this is really where you have your analog emulation. So type E and type G, this is SSL. Brit N is your Neve. I think the 250 is an API. Pretty sure. I didn't actually go through the manual on all of these, but I'm not really sure on what all of them are. But yeah, you got quite a bit of analog emulation in here. And when you actually choose one of these, if I was to choose a bell for the SSL, we'll say, let's do a G. It actually makes the knobs in here look like an SSL. So essentially, you really are getting not just SSL emulation audibly, but also visually. So that's pretty cool, okay? So, working with this here, I'm actually going to put this back to just the bell here. So if we want to just move this around like this here, what I was talking about earlier, we can really shape these. So if I do like a slope, I can make this, look like a, what would you call that? A plant, not a plantain. That's like a banana, a plateau. So I actually work with EQs like this in my Slate Infinity EQ when I'm mastering. I like to actually work with things that are really sloped like this. So I really like EQs that allow for this. So I consider this more on the digital side to do stuff like this. This is not typically something you would see with an analog EQ. So we're getting the nice features of a digital EQ in here mixed with analog, and then analog emulation also, which is fantastic, okay? So now the question is, you're probably asking, well, how do I get to the dynamic section of this EQ? Well, all you have to do is hit this little D button right here, and here are all your dynamic controls in here, okay? So quite a bit in here. This is stuff you have to play with here. I typically use the dynamic EQs built into Isotope, which I think are a little bit easier to use than this here. I've not played with these yet, but these look like these have a lot more options, so you'll probably be able to fine-tune them quite a bit better than Isotope, I would say. Okay, so that's definitely a plus. As I mentioned, this is the Swiss Army knife. This gives you literally everything, okay? So lastly, I just want to mention that if you want to do a mid-side EQ, all you have to do is create a band, right-click, go down to stereo. We'll make this one mid. Now it's got an M on it. I'll make another band, I'll right click, and I will make this one side. So now this band here is strictly affecting the mids, and this band here is strictly affecting the sides, okay? So that is pretty much everything that I wanted to go over with you guys in this EQ on how to use it and some of the features within it. So now let's actually take a listen to it in this analog experiment, comparing it to some of the SSL EQ channel strips out there on overdrive guitars. All right, so that was my little experiment there. And I have to say, comparing the Waves EV2 with the Kirchhoff EQ E-Series setting, I have to say they don't sound all that much similar. We definitely have quite a bit of difference in the lower mids, a lot more in the Kirchhoff EQ. Now, with the SSL channel strip 2 and the Kirchhoff EQ using the G setting, that was pretty darn similar. Now, I will say that we did have a little bit more in the lower mids also with the Kirchhoff, but just a smidge. They were almost exact. Honestly, if I wasn't really thinking about it, I probably wouldn't have heard a difference, to be honest. If we're sitting here obviously analyzing this, so yes, we're gonna hear a difference, but you could put that in a mix and you could go back and forth like that and it'd be perfectly fine in an actual released recording. Nobody would care. It would sound that close, okay? So, keep in mind also too that it could just be the actual SSL console that they modeled that makes it a little bit different. That's, things we have to take into mind when the actual modeling happens. So, we gotta look at things like that. But sound-wise, my God, that's like pretty much dead on in this thing. So you're getting an EQ here with all those features, a pretty much exact replica of an SSL EQ in here, and God knows the other analog ones in here if they're dead on. I don't want to tell you if they're dead on because I pretty much mostly only work with SSL. I can't really tell you if an EV is right on. I can't tell you if an API is because I don't really work with those hardwares. My experience outside of the box has been with physical SSL consoles. That I can actually say, hey, this sounds like an SSL console. And all of my emulation I've used in a computer has pretty much been SSL because it's my preference, okay? So, Yes, it's pretty much dead on. And these features in here, we get the whole digital side of this EQ along with linear phase we can use for mastering purposes. You get just everything with this EQ. But I'm going to say something very bold here. In my opinion, as a whole, this is the best EQ plugin I have ever used, okay? Now, am I going to use this to replace, my EV2 in my actual, EQing in a mix? I don't know, probably not, because there's other things within my channel strip that I use that's part of my workflow. But as a whole, this thing does everything, okay? So if you guys are looking for something that can handle your actual mixing, your mastering, take care of pretty much any EQ problem you have, including doing, a dynamic EQ that can replace some of your actual compressing, because we can, fix some dynamic issues with dynamic EQ as opposed to compression, then yeah, you should look at this plugin because the price, yes, a little bit higher, but definitely worth all the things that I can do, okay? So again, if you guys like this plugin, I have a link in the description below where you can go purchase it. And if you guys end up liking this video, give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe because I'm making this content for you and hit that notification bell to know when I have new videos coming out. And if you guys enjoyed this video, check out my first video that I ever did, which was on the Slate Infinity EQ, what I mentioned earlier in this video. And with that being said, until the next video, I will see you guys later and peace out.